The 2014 Formula One season is the 65th season of the Formula One World Championship, a motor racing championship for Formula One cars which is recognized by the sport's governing body, the FIA Copyright Russian International de l'Automobile, as the highest class of competition for open-wheel racing cars. The season started in Australia on March 16 and will conclude in Abu Dhabi on November 23. 11 teams and 22 drivers will compete in 19 Grands Prix for the World Drivers' and World Constructors' Championships. In 2014, the championship saw the introduction of a revised engine formula, in which the 2.4-litre V8 engine configuration previously used between 2006 and 2013 has been replaced with a new formula specifying a 1.6-litre turbocharged V6 engine that incorporates an energy recovery system into its build. The 2014 calendar features substantial revisions from the 2013 season. The Russian Grand Prix will be held for the first time in a century at the Sochi International Street Circuit in Sochi, and the Austrian Grand Prix will be revived, with the race to be held at the Red Bull Ring in Spielberg. The Indian Grand Prix will be discontinued for an indeterminate period, whilst the Korean Grand Prix has been removed from the schedule entirely. Sebastian Vettel started the season as the defending drivers' champion after securing his fourth consecutive title at the 2013 Indian Grand Prix. His team, Red Bull Racing, began the season as the defending constructors' champions, having also won their fourth consecutive championship in India. Mercedes driver Nico Rosberg leads the Drivers' Championship after 10 rounds, ahead of his teammate, Lewis Hamilton, and Red Bull's Daniel Ricciardo. Mercedes leads the Constructors' standings by 178 points from Red Bull Racing. Teams and drivers. The following teams and drivers are taking part in the 2014 season. Team changes. Cosworth elected not to build an engine to fit the 2014 generation of regulations. This decision prompted Marussia, the only team using Cosworth engines during the 2013 season, to seek out a new engine supplier. They later joined Ferrari's customer program, with Ferrari providing the team with both engine and powertrain for 2014 and beyond. Scuderia Toro Rosso secured an agreement with Renault for engines in 2014, ending their 7-year arrangement with Ferrari. Williams parted ways with Renault after 2 seasons, switching to Mercedes power in what the team described as a long-term deal. The deal came after Renault publicized their intentions to reduce their engine supply to 3 teams in 2014, before the French manufacturer ultimately settled on supplying 4. In 2011, former British-American racing team principal Craig Pollock announced the formation of Propulsion Universelle et Récupération d'énergie commonly known by its acronym, PURA, and signaled his intentions to enter the sport in 2014 as a customer engine supplier, with the full support of the FIA. However, the engine program was eventually suspended in July 2012 due to problems regarding funding, and was ultimately unable to secure any clients for the 2014 season. Driver changes. Felipe Massa left Ferrari at the end of the 2013 season after 8 years racing for the team. He moved to Williams, alongside Valtteri Bottas. Pastor Maldonado, having been replaced at Williams by Massa, moved to Lotus F1, taking the seat vacated by 2007 world champion Kimi Räikkönen. Räikkönen returned to Ferrari, the team he raced for from 2007 to 2009. The partnership of Räikkönen and Fernando Alonso marks the first time since 1954 that Ferrari have contested a season with 2 world drivers' champions in the team. Mark Webber retired from Formula One after 12 seasons, the last 7 with Red Bull Racing. He moved to the FIA World Endurance Championship, driving for Porsche AG in their brand new Le Mans prototype, the Porsche 919 Hybrid. Daniel Ricciardo left Scuderia Toro Rosso to fill his seat, becoming the second driver to graduate from the team's young driver program to their premier racing team. Scuderia Toro Rosso chose 2013 GP3 Series champion Daniil Kvyat as Ricciardo's replacement. Sergio Parcopyright Rez left McLaren after a single season with the team. He was replaced by 2013 Formula Renault 3.5 Series champion and McLaren Young Driver Programme member Kevin Magnussen. Par copyright Res moved to Force India, where he was joined by Nico Hulkenberg, who returned to the team after 1 year with Sauber. As a result of the Hulkenberg and Par copyright Res deals, Paul Di Resta and Adrian Sutil lost their seats with the team. Sutil went on to secure Hulkenberg's vacant seat at Sauber, while Di Resta left Formula One entirely and returned to the Deutsche Tourenwagen Masters, the series he competed in prior to joining Formula One. Kami Kobayashi returned to Formula One with Caterham, after spending the 2013 season competing in the World Endurance Championship. He was partnered with GP2 Series regular Marcus Ericsson, who became the first Swedish driver in Formula One since Stefan Johansson retired from the sport in 1991. The decision left both Guido van der Garde and Charles Pic without a drive, and both went on to take reserve driver roles with other teams. Van der Garde joined Sauber, while Pic moved to Lotus. Susie Wolff joined Williams as a test and reserve driver, with a program that included participation in selected free practice 1 sessions. In doing so, she became the first female driver to take part in a Grand Prix weekend since Giovanna Amati failed to qualify for the 1992 Brazilian Grand Prix. Mid-season changes: in the week before the British Grand Prix, Caterham F1 announced the team owner Tony Fernandes had sold his controlling stake in the team to a group of Swiss and Dubai-based investors. Former Midland and Spiker driver Christijan Albers was appointed as team principal, with the team declaring its intentions to continue competing under the Caterham name. Season calendar: the following 19 Grands Prix are currently scheduled to take place in 2014. Calendar changes: Red Bull reached an agreement with Bernie Ecclestone to revive the Austrian Grand Prix after a 10-year absence from the calendar. The race will be held at the Red Bull Ring, which previously hosted the Austrian Grand Prix in 2003, when the circuit was known as the A1 Ring. The Bahrain Grand Prix was held as a night event under lights, similar to the Singapore Grand Prix. The decision to hold the race under lights was taken as a means of marking the 10th anniversary of the event. In March 2014, Bernie Ecclestone revealed that he had come to an agreement to return the French Grand Prix to the calendar after a 6-year absence, with the Circuit de Nevers-Megnicaux as the intended venue, but the deal collapsed shortly after it had been reached. The Hockenheimring is scheduled to return to the calendar to host the German Grand Prix, in keeping with the event-sharing agreement first established in 2008 with an R1 Quarter-Ring for the two circuits to host the Grand Prix in alternating years. The Hockenheimring last hosted a Formula One Grand Prix in 2012. The Indian Grand Prix will not be held in 2014 following the devaluation of the Indian rupee and ongoing complications arising from Indian taxation laws, which had dogged the event since its inaugural race in 2011, with authorities classifying the Grand Prix as entertainment, which under Indian law would have entitled the authorities to claim a portion of the team's revenue as tax for competing in India, something they would have been unable to do if the race had been classified as a sport. The race promoters initially came to an agreement with Bernie Ecclestone to skip the 2014 event and return to the calendar early in 2015. However, in March 2014, Ecclestone stated that the race will likely be pushed back to 2016 while the sport tries to resolve the taxation issue. The Korean Grand Prix, Mexican Grand Prix, and the Grand Prix of America were included in the provisional calendar published in September 2013, but were later removed from the final calendar released in December. The calendar will see the addition of the Russian Grand Prix, with the race to be held at the Sochi International Street Circuit at the end of the season. The race will take place on a street circuit to be constructed around the Sochi Olympic Park. It will be the first Russian Grand Prix in a century, and the first time the country has ever hosted a round of the Formula One World Championship. The International Olympic Committee had cautioned that it would use its power to delay the race until 2015 if it felt that construction of the circuit and facilities were disrupting preparations for the 2014 Winter Olympic Games. This is no longer an issue as the 2014 Winter Olympics have been successfully completed. The United States Grand Prix had been provisionally scheduled for November 9. However, The date coincided with the University of Texas American football team home game, which would have strained Austin's tourism infrastructure. The final calendar rescheduled the race for November 2 to eliminate this conflict. Regulation changes, technical regulations. The 2014 season saw the introduction of a new engine formula, with turbocharged engines returning to the sport for the first time since 1988. The new engines are a 1.6-litre V6 format with an 8-speed semi-automatic gearbox. The rules dictate the use of a 90-degree engine bank, with fixed crankshaft and mounting points for the chassis, while the engines are limited to 15,000 RPMs. Individual engine units under the 2014 specifications must last for at least 4,000 km before being replaced, in comparison to the pre-2014 engines, which were required to last for just 2,000 km. The engines, now known as power units, are divided into 6 separate components: the internal combustion engine, turbocharger, motor generator unit kinetic, which harvests energy that would normally be wasted under braking, motor generator unit heat, which collects energy in the form of heat as it is expelled through the exhaust, energy store, which function as batteries, holding the energy gathered by the motor generator units, and control electronics, which include the electronic control unit and software used to manage the entire power unit. Under the previous generation of engines, used from 2006 to 2013, engines were subject to a development freeze, which prohibited manufacturers from upgrading their engines. Faced with the complexity of the 2014 engines, the engine freeze was replaced with a points trading system to prevent manufacturers from being unable to develop or improve their engines. Under the system, the individual parts of the engine are classified as Tier 1, Tier 2 and Tier 3, and are assigned a points value therewithin. Engine manufacturers are given a budget of 66 points, which they are free to spend on engine development, with points deducted from their budget depending on the parts developed. The Kinetic Energy Recovery System, known from 2009 to 2013 as KERS, and renamed from 2014 as ERS-CAR, is incorporated into the design of the engine and its usage increased. Its function as a supplementary power source has been taken by the introduction of the heat-based energy recovery system. The ERS unit captures waste heat as it is dispelled from the exhaust turbocharger, using an electrical device known as a heat motor generator unit. This waste heat is stored as an electrical charge until it is used by a complementary system called the kinetic motor generator unit. This device is connected directly to the drivetrain to deliver the additional power in the most direct and efficient way. In combination with the ERS-K, it gives drivers an additional 161 bhp for 33 seconds per lap, compared to the KERS units used prior to 2014, which gave drivers 80 bhp for 6 seconds per lap. This energy is released into the powertrain by the electronic control unit to promote the most efficient and effective application of the power, but the driver has the ability to manually override the ECU and use the remaining available power instantly. Teams are permitted to use electronic braking devices to manage the braking of the rear wheels, as the increased power output from the ERS-K units makes regulating the brake bias much harder than it had been previously. Teams may no longer change their gear ratios from race to suit the individual demands of a circuit. Instead, they must nominate 8 gear ratios ahead of the first race of the season, and these 8 ratios are used at every Grand Prix. They were given one opportunity to change their ratios once the season had started, but any subsequent changes will incur a grid penalty. The 2014 regulations require the use of lower noses than in previous years, in the interests of safety. The tip of the nose has to be no more than 185 mm above the ground, in comparison to the 550 mm allowed in 2012. These regulations were amended in June 2013 so as to completely outlaw the use of the stepped noses used in 2012 and 2013, thereby forcing teams to design a car with a genuinely lower nose rather than using the temporary solution. The original rules first published in August 2011 also called for a variety of bodywork changes aimed at cutting down force, most notably through the use of narrower front wings, and a shallower angle to the main plane of rear wings. These additional changes were formally abandoned in December 2012, but the requirement that cars be built with a nose no more than 185 mm above the ground was retained. The planned reduction in front wing width from 1,800 mm to 1,650 mm was subsequently reintroduced. Teams are no longer able to use a beam wing at the rear of the car, a small carbon fiber wing mounted above the diffuser designed to generate low pressure as air passed over it, allowing them greater control over the air that was being deliberately directed over the diffuser. In order to promote fuel efficiency, fuel flow is restricted to 100 kg/h above 10,500 rpms. Below 10,500 rpms, a formula for the maximum flow must be applied based on the RPM in use. Following Daniel Ricciardo's disqualification from the Australian Grand Prix for exceeding the fuel flow limit, the FIA issued a technical directive preventing teams from making modifications to their fuel sensors after an investigation into the problem found that compounds in the bespoke fuel used by some teams were corroding a rubber seal in the sensor, leading to anomalous readings. The position of the exhaust outlet changed so that it is now angled upwards toward the rear wing instead of downwards to face the rear diffuser so as to make the practice of using exhaust-blown diffusers passing exhaust gases over the rear diffuser to improve the car's downforce extremely difficult to achieve. The minimum weight of the cars has been increased from 642 kg to 691 kg to account for the increased weight of the engine, energy recovery units, and 2014 specification of tyres. In the week following the British Grand Prix, the FIA announced a total ban on the front and rear interconnected suspension system starting with immediate effect on the grounds that it was a movable aerodynamic device under Article 3.15 of the technical regulations. The FRIC system links the front and rear suspension arrays together, using inertia to transfer hydraulic fluid across the car to offset the effects of weight transfer on the car under braking, acceleration and cornering, thereby creating a static ride height and improving stability. The use of false camera mountings has been banned. Teams had previously exploited a loophole in the regulations that allowed them to add additional pieces of bodywork to the car in the place of camera mountings and take advantage of the aerodynamic benefits. From 2014, this loophole is closed, with the regulations rewritten to only allow camera mountings to be used for cameras. This rule was later updated to force the teams to mount the cameras on an external piece of bodywork after Red Bull Racing fit their cameras within the nose of the RB10 chassis. Sporting regulations, mid-season testing returned in 2014. 3 European venues will each host a 2-day test in the week following the Grand Prix held at the circuit, with one test being held in the week after the final round in Abu Dhabi. In addition to this, teams must dedicate one of these days to aiding tyre supplier Pirelli in the development of their tyres. These rules were later adjusted to allow teams to choose which venues they tested at during the season. Additionally, cars are also classified as current, previous, and historic, with the FIA introducing limits on which cars may be used and the conditions under which they are tested. The end-of-season young driver tests, which were held to give teams the opportunity to assess rookie drivers, were discontinued. The penalty system has been overhauled in 2014 so as to improve driving standards, with the introduction of a penalty point system for driving offences. Under the system, driving offences carry a predetermined points value based on their severity. These points are tallied up over the course of a season, with a driver receiving a race ban after accumulating 12 penalty points. Any driver who receives a race ban would also receive an additional 5 penalty points upon their return, as a form of probation to discourage further driving offences. Penalty points remain on a driver's license for 12 months, at which point they will be removed. Stewards have the power to hand out 5-second penalties in addition to the existing range of penalties within their power. The 5-second penalties were introduced for situations where a penalty was justified, but the existing penalties such as a drive-through or a stop-go penalty were considered too severe, or where such a penalty would radically alter the outcome of a race if applied retroactively, with penalized drivers facing the loss of championship points for otherwise minor violations of the rules. Drivers are permitted to serve these penalties before a regular pit stop, with the drivers stopping in their pit bay for 5 seconds before any work is carried out on the car. Drivers serving drive-through or stop-go penalties are still not permitted to serve a penalty ahead of their pit stop, and are instead required to enter the pit lane separately to serve the penalty. The rules regarding unsafe pit releases are Euro, when a car is released from its pit bay to the lane directly into the path of an oncoming car. Euro have been rewritten, with the driver who is released in an unsafe fashion given a grid penalty for the next race. The pit lane speed limit has been reduced from 100 km/h to 80 km/h. Drivers are only able to use 5 engines over the course of a season in 2014, down from 8 in 2013. Drivers who use a 6th engine start the race from the pit lane, as opposed to the 10-place grid penalty handed down for going over the engine quota in previous season. Drivers are only able to use 5 individual components of each power unit element over the course of the season. Should a driver go over this quota for any individual element, they incur a 10-place grid penalty. They will receive a further 5-place penalty for going over the 5-unit allocation of any other element after the original 10-place penalty is applied in a bid to stop teams changing multiple elements of the engine unit after receiving a grid penalty. In the event that such a penalty relegates a driver past the back row of the grid, the remaining penalty will carry over to the next race. For example, if a driver qualifies in 19th position and receives a 5-place grid penalty, they will drop to 22nd and last place for that race, and then receive an additional 2-place penalty in the next Grand Prix. These penalties can only be carried over to the next race, rather than accumulate, and only apply to penalties issued for going over the component quota. The procedure for issuing penalties for speeding under yellow flag conditions in qualifying has been changed for 2014. Previously, drivers had been forced to slow down in the timing sector of the circuit where a yellow flag was being waved. However, after a series of penalties were issued to drivers for speeding in a sector with yellow flags when the incident that triggered the yellow flag took place behind them, the FIA introduced a change to the procedure. Starting in 2014, the circuits are divided into 200-meter intervals. In the event of a yellow flag, drivers must demonstrate that they slow down in the 200 meters immediately before and after the yellow flags while they are being displayed, or else face a penalty. Following a series of high-profile incidents involving tyres throughout the 2013 season that culminated in a string of explosive blowouts at the 2013 British Grand Prix, the FIA passed a resolution granting them the power to change the specifications of the tyres used by competitors with immediate effect should the need arise. Drivers have been assigned permanent numbers for the duration of their careers, with the championship adopting a system similar to the one used in MotoGP. The number 1 will be the champion's right, with drivers free to choose any number from 2 to 99. The champion's regular number is reserved while they are using the number 1. The regulations further stipulate that a driver's number must be clearly visible, both on their car and on their helmet. Previously, the numbering system had been partially based on the World Constructors' Championship finishing positions from the previous year. Drivers who do not take part in a qualifying period are assigned grid positions based on the qualifying bracket they were in at the time and their free practice through lap times. For example, if 2 drivers qualify for but do not take part in Q3, they start the race from 9th and 10th places, with the positions they take decided by their FP3 times. The rule was rewritten as grid positions for drivers who had not set lap times or left the pits had previously been decided by car numbers. The FIA has introduced the pole trophy, a non-championship award presented to the driver who qualifies on pole for the most races. The qualifying format has been adjusted to allow drivers more time to complete flying laps in Q3. The final qualifying period is extended to 12 minutes in length, with Q1 scaled back to 18 minutes to keep the entire session within 1 hour. The 107% rule has been relaxed at the start of the season to account for teams dealing with the challenges arising from the new engine regulations. FIA race director Charlie Whiting was quoted as saying that the enforcement of the rule would be taken on a case-by-case basis, but that the stewards would consider a driver able to qualify provided they set consistent lap times in free practice. The FIA introduced a curfew system in 2011 that prohibited team personnel from accessing the circuit in the 6 hours before the first session of the day, with teams given 4 jokers exceptions to the rule that allowed them to stay within the circuit boundaries past the curfew hours without penalties so as to complete work on cars to use throughout the season. The rule has been revised for 2014, with teams given 6 exceptions over the course of the year as a response to the introduction of the new engine formula. Drivers must be able to return to the pits under their own power after the checkered flag has fallen in a bid to stop drivers from pulling over in order to preserve the mandatory 1-litre fuel sample required to pass post-race scrutineering. Teams are now allowed to run up to 4 drivers during both Friday practice sessions, though they're still limited to entering 2 cars during the sessions. If one of the team's nominated drivers is unable to take part, any replacement driver must use the engine, gearbox and tires which were allocated to the original driver. The final race of the season offers double points to teams and drivers in a bid to keep the championship fight alive for longer. Season report. Mercedes currently leads the World Constructors' Championship after winning the first 6 races of the season. Nico Rosberg currently leads the World Drivers' Championship, while his teammate Lewis Hamilton sits second in the standings. Rosberg won the Australian and Monaco Grands Prix, and Hamilton the races in Malaysia, Bahrain, China and Spain after retiring in Australia. Mercedes team's run of victories ended in Canada where Rosberg and Hamilton were simultaneously hit with a power unit failure that put additional strain on their brakes. Hamilton was forced out of the race and while Rosberg was able to continue, his performance deteriorated and he ultimately finished second. Mercedes returned to the top of the podium in Austria, with Rosberg leading Hamilton across the finish line for his 3rd victory of the season. Hamilton reclaimed ground in the championship standings in Britain winning after Rosberg's run was forced out with gearbox issues. Rosberg claimed the win in German, while Hamilton recovered to 3rd after an accident in Q1 and gearbox penalties saw him start from 20th place. Red Bull Racing is 2nd overall, after suffering a difficult start to the season when Sebastian Vettel retired and Daniel Ricciardo was disqualified from the Australian Grand Prix. Red Bull appealed the disqualification, but the result was upheld by the International Court of Appeal. Vettel went on to finish 3rd in Malaysia, while Ricciardo retired, and both drivers scored points in Bahrain and China. Ricciardo recorded his first podium finish with a 3rd place in Spain, while Vettel recovered to 4th place after technical problems and a penalty for a gearbox change saw him start the race from the 15th position. Ricciardo finished in 3rd place in Monaco, while Vettel retired due to an issue with his power unit. Ricciardo took advantage of Mercedes team's difficulties in Canada to claim his maiden Grand Prix victory, while Vettel finished 3rd. The team struggled in their home race in Austria, with Vettel retiring early and Ricciardo finishing 8th. Ricciardo returned to the podium in Britain, while Vettel finished 5th after a protracted battle with Alonso. Vettel and Ricciardo were 4th and 6th respectively in German. Williams is 3rd, having started the season strongly when Valtteri Bottas scored more points in the opening race than the Williams team did during the 2013 season. Bottas and teammate Felipe Massa went on to record points finishes in Malaysia and Bahrain. The team recorded another minor points finish in China, before Bottas showed enough pace to challenge Ricciardo for a podium position early in the Spanish Grand Prix, but eventually settled for 4th before being overtaken by Vettel late in the race. Massa finished 7th in Monaco, while Bottas retired. In Canada, Massa showed good enough pace to challenge for the lead in the late stages of the race, but after his collision with Par Copyright Res on the final lap he didn't even get any points. Massa qualified on pole in Austria, his first since the 2008 Brazilian Grand Prix, and he went on to finish in 4th while Bottas scored his first podium of his career, crossing the line in 3rd place. Bottas secured his first back-to-back podium finishes scoring 2nd place in Britain and soon after claimed his first hat-trick after finishing 2nd place in Germany while Massa retired on the opening lap after a collision with Magnussen saw his car upside down before returning to 4 wheels. Ferrari sits in 4th, with Fernando Alonso and Kimi Räikkönen scoring a mixed run of results in the opening races. Alonso took his first podium of the season third in China, while Räikkönen was pointless, before they finished sixth and seventh respectively in Spain. Alonso finished fourth in Monaco, while Räikkönen again finished pointless, following a tyre puncture. Both drivers recorded minor points in Canada and again in Austria. Alonso had to be content in sixth place in Britain after a rain-affected qualifying saw him start from 16th place, while Räikkönen crashed heavily on the opening lap, forcing the temporary stoppage of the race. Alonso finished in fifth place in German, while Räikkönen was outside the points. Force India holds fifth place whilst scoring their first podium finish since the 2009 Belgian Grand Prix. Sergio Parc-Copyright-Reyes, who finished third for the team in Bahrain, was on target to score another podium in Canada, but was rear-ended by Felipe Massa late in the race and both retired. Parc-Copyright-Reyes briefly held the lead in Austria, but gradually fell back to 6th, and recorded the fastest lap, whilst Nico Hulkenberg battled Räikkönen for 9th. Hulkenberg finished 8th in Britain, while Parc-Copyright-Reyes was outside the points. Both drivers scored minor points in German. McLaren holds 6th place. Following their first season without a podium finish in 2013, the team saw Kevin Magnussen and Jenson Button finish second and third in Australia. Both drivers recorded points finishes in Malaysia, but were forced out of the Bahrain Grand Prix with clutch issues, and failed to score points in China and again in Spain. The team managed to recover in Monaco, with Button finishing 6th and Magnussen 10th after contact with Räikkönen. Button finished 4th in Canada after a string of late race retirements helped him move up the order. Magnussen used his recent knowledge of the circuit to finish 7th in Austria, while Button's attempt at a different strategy failed, leaving him in 11th. Button and Magnussen were 4th and 7th respectively in Britain. Button finished 8th in German, ahead of his teammate Magnussen. Scuderia Toro Rosso is in 7th place overall, with Russian rookie Daniil Kvyat becoming the youngest driver to score points in Formula One, having finished 9th in Australia. Jean-Eric Vergne finished 8th in Canada, while Kvyat retired with a mechanical failure. Both drivers retired in separate reasons in Austria, after Kvyat suffered a rear suspension failure and Vergne's race was undone by brake issues. Both drivers recorded points in Britain. After missing the first test of pre-season, Lotus is in the 8th position, with Romain Grosjean finishing 8th in both Spain and Monaco, while Pastor Maldonado remains without points so far. Marussia is 9th, owing to Jules Bianchi's scoring points in Monaco as he finished the race in the 9th place, but both drivers collided on the opening lap of the Canadian Grand Prix, bringing about an end to Max Chilton's run of 25 consecutive classified race finishes. Bianchi managed to score the team's best ever qualifying result with 12th in Britain. Sauber and Caterham sit 10th and 11th overall, with both teams having failed to score a point so far this season. Sauber suffered a string of retirements for both drivers while struggling with a car that was too heavy. Caterham spent the early races trading places with Marussia, but fell behind once Bianchi scored points for the Russian team in Monaco, despite an 11th place finish for Marcus Ericsson in the same race. Results and standings: Grands Prix, driver standings, points are awarded to the top 10 classified finishers using the following structure. Notes: Euro drivers did not finish the Grand Prix, but were classified as they completed more than 90% of the race distance. A Euro equal or less than a Euro double points will be awarded at the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. Constructors standings. Notes: Euro drivers did not finish the Grand Prix, but were classified as they completed more than 90% of the race distance. A Euro double points will be awarded at the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. FIA Pole Trophy. The FIA Pole Trophy will be awarded to the driver who qualified on pole position most often throughout the season. In the event of a tiebreaker, with two drivers qualifying on pole an equal number of times, the number of times they qualified in second will be used to settle the result. No additional championship points are awarded for starting a race from pole. Footnotes. References. External links: the official website of Formula One, the official website of the FIA, copyright DAO, copyright Russian International de l'Automobile.